Hello, good morning, welcome. I am Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor. You are on Damn Radio this morning. Very glad to have you. Feel free to phone in today. Might even answer. 573-746-8020 is the number. I'm all coffeeed up this morning because I don't sleep well. And last night was a bad night. Oh, it drives me freaking bananas. Not being able to sleep. It's been going on for years. And I don't know. I don't like drugging up, But I suppose that's neither here nor there. It doesn't matter. My theme for today, I got a theme. And everybody knows that I talk quite a bit about infrastructure, global infrastructure. We talk quite a bit about economic and financial infrastructure on this program, and the various regionalization of trade agreements going on in the world. We spoke last week about the economic forum in Davos, World Economic Forum that was held there, and many of the speeches that were there. Today, I want to add a little bit of the commentary and interview of Elon Musk. There's been quite a bit of fallout. The world is still fixated on this because it's an enormous issue. We had a collapse yesterday. Collapse is probably too harsh a word, but serious worry going on about the what? The bond market. The Japanese funding of that bond market as the largest holder of U.S. debt, which is ridiculously high. There's been, I talk about infrastructure, and part of the financial infrastructure for decades, probably. It really kicked off after World War II and Bretton Woods and, creation of the World Bank and Japan being basically an economic vassal of America, ever since that time, and starting to make its own. Their economy has been tied to ours for quite a while. And I've lectured before about how our debt is key. The dollar is no longer perceived, not necessarily as the safe haven. The dollar is strong for the most part, but not that it's not a safe haven, but that it's no longer stable, let's call it, or no longer totally secure. Our credit rating is it's not mine, mine's reasonably okay, and reasonably good, and but the United States credit rating is goes up and down, and but I'm talking more about the stability of our system, I suppose you could call it, financial, political. And I heard I watched a video by a guy who I'd never heard before. And he's what did he call himself? A capital investor. That's his job. He's Chinese. He was very well spoken. And he said some things that I hadn't really considered before. And it was truly interesting. I talked about, and there's been some fallout from Carney visiting, and Canada talking about different trade deals with China week before last, and then the World Economic Forum, and then this week, the big news, and I'm going to share this with you because it's only a minute or two long, and I'm going to start with this. Well, you know what? I'm going to get to her in a second. Let me finish my train of thought. The train's going slow this morning because I didn't sleep that much. and I did a lot of reading, overnight. That's for sure. And it just, I don't know. I'm trying to decide if I really want to start this way or the other way, and I think I do want to start here. I'm trying to build around the single idea. It sounds simple, but it explains far more than policy baits will ever be explained to us. The idea is infrastructure. And I don't mean infrastructure as like a buzzword, not infrastructure as the line item on the budget, but infrastructure as kind of like the operating system, okay? Because what is the operating system in the financial market? It's the currencies, a stable system, safe stuff. It's roads, it's rail, it's ports economically, it's power grids, water systems, digital and financial networks. Plumbing networks, basically. All this is just what goes on in the house to keep your house warm, the basics. And that is infrastructure. And when you talk about infrastructure as things like high-speed rail, things like new ports, things like all of that, I've railed about that from time to time on this show in America because all of ours is driven by capital. And if you understand infrastructure of everything, or you focus first on the fundamentals are infrastructure. And, I want to talk specifically about China because I am not a China historian. I kind of wish I was, but I'm not. And so all we hear in America is China bad, America good. I mean, it's basically, you put on any news program, China's the evil empire and we are the good guys, and the global order, is threatened by China's rise. Okay. Now, for my part, I don't necessarily see it that way. And I'm not saying that I don't see it that way. I'm saying not necessarily. It depends on what we're talking about. So what I want to do is walk through the infrastructure world slowly and carefully with that infrastructure world. Now, we already talked last week about World Economic Forum and about Davos. And prior to that, we talked about Carney and his 2-day, 3-day visit to China with decent number of staff and businesses. They're trying to, the first time in, I can't remember what he said, 6 to 8 years. Well, listen to this news report. And this wasn't this just flashed on the screen on one of the TVs in here. And so I found it and saved it, and it's only 2 minutes long. So add this to the mix of what we are discussing, what we've been talking about the last for a long time with me, infrastructure. But here comes how the global infrastructure, and especially post Davos, because there's been a lot of I don't know what, a lot of turmoil afterward. Lots of fighting words, by Trump and stuff like that. So I'm going to share this little news blurb with you. This comes from ABC News Australia. Okay, and here we begin.
This will be the first visit by a UK Prime Minister here in nearly a decade as it seeks to end what's been described as an ice age in the relationship with Beijing. Keir Starmer will be joined by companies and businesses, all hoping his government will be able to secure new trade deals with China to boost the UK's economy. And China is welcoming the UK back with open arms as it seeks to cement its place further on the global stage.
英国工党政府执政以来
Since coming to power, the UK Labour government has expressed its willingness to develop a coherent, lasting and strategic bilateral relationship with China and actively promote dialogue and cooperation between the two countries. China is willing to take this opportunity to enhance mutual political trust and deepen pragmatic cooperation.
This visit is going to be closely watched by Sino-analysts, coming just weeks after a pretty extraordinary trip here by the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, where he also reset ties with Beijing, making significant trade deals and boldly declaring the new relationship between Canada and China was setting up a new world order, one that pushed aside the traditional power of the United States and ruptured a relationship with Washington and Donald Trump. Unlike his Canadian counterpart, the UK Prime Minister doesn't necessarily want this trip to be seen as a tilt away from the United States, even as he warns that the world is the most unstable it's been in a generation.
Well, how do you like that? I think that is something quite important, and that is actually taking place right now. So, and look how carefully, after Trump beat up on Carney after Davos, the UK is being a little more careful in how they are allowing this to be talked about. You know, ABC is talking about it. I'm going to share with you Jeffrey Sachs' commentary last night. Now, it was on CNN, so you can say it's twisted or whatever. I don't like watching CNN, but I like watching Jeffrey Sachs. And it's on a similar topic, and it's short, so I'm going to share it all with you later in the show. But I think it's very important what is going on. And I may share bits and pieces of it with you. I doubt it, because it was a long track, and I couldn't really get to the parts that I wanted to too many tracks, too many cuts in it in order to do it. It's a couple hours long, and I just watched it, and I don't want to go search for all the topics, and too hard to do. But let's talk about China for a minute, because one of the most important points, there's a guy named Eric Lee, L-I, Eric Lee. And he's the capitalist, venture capitalist that I was talking about, okay? And he's Chinese. And it wasn't really an ideological discussion. It was more of a fact-based discussion. And he was being careful, because he was at he wasn't at the World Economic Forum, it was somewhere else. And he was it was a small conference with a group of people, and he was addressing a large auditorium. But I didn't get where it was. I just watched it, last night with great interest. And he made a statement that sometimes gets glossed over, because it's almost it's almost, well, it's hard to figure out. Okay, and what he said was that he is aware that in the last 10 years, since 2012, I think, is when Xi Jinping came to power, that they have lifted in China, their system economically has lifted 100 million people out of poverty, more than 100 million, and created more billionaires than the rest of the world combined. So, although and he said something very interesting about the Chinese system. If you get a chance, his name is Eric Lee, and you might go and hunt him out. It'll take you an hour to watch the thing, but he's on YouTube, on whatever forum he was in or channel this was on. I don't recall, but and I'll find it. I got it in my playlist here somewhere. But Eric Lee, L-I, and Eric with a C, just E-R-I-C. And he gave some interesting facts and commentary about Xi Jinping, about the world as it is today, and many of the things that he discussed were systemic. He talked about one of the key points that he brought out that really struck me and got me on this infrastructure, and it's something that I talked about. I did a full program on China's belts and roads and how it's helping develop the global south and how they're making partnerships around the globe with other countries, right? And he points out that China is the top trading partner. China, top trading partner for more than 100 countries worldwide. And I tried to find the exact quote. I think he said 130, something like that. There's under 200 countries on the planet. And, the point is that this doesn't happen because of slogans. It happens because trade follows infrastructure. Ports, rails, belt and roads, energy corridors, logistics hubs, finance arrangements, they all create gravity. Once those systems exist, trade doesn't need persuasion. You're not going to create trade. It'll create itself. And what he said, one of the direct quotes he said, he said it's a saying in China. Now think about this. He said, if you want to make money or build your economy, don't build a bank, build a road. Build a road. Shortened. You want to produce you want to bring people out of poverty. Now remember, in 1990, roughly 1980s and 90s, China was extremely rural and agrarian. And now, absolutely not the case. And that has been like sort of a motto, according to what he was saying, is that they built roads and infrastructure. He was talking specifically about belts and roads, but he was saying a lot of people don't realize that this is how the Chinese think. Plus, they haven't exported all of their capital. They've helped build infrastructure elsewhere, and they are investing their money elsewhere, but they have financed. I mean, they don't have the debt like everybody else. They were the largest holder of American debt now, and they're unloading it quick, and this is causing problems, okay? But this is the part that Western commentators consistently seem to miss. You don't become the primary trade partner for 100 countries by exporting ideology or by changing regimes or seizing Greenland or Venezuela or the 50-plus regime change operations that the United States has been involved in since World War II. So this fact is important because it explains why Belt and Roads Initiative matters. It explains why sanctions lose their effectiveness. It explains the de-risk that I talk about all the time by people not abandoning the dollar, but creating alternatives. Not by abandoning the dollar, but by trading in their own currency. The same guy said something, and all these things, you know how you can find out if something is intelligent? It actually makes sense. He said he had a discussion with a European economist that was saying that the euro, everybody likes to have euro and people are flooding to the euro. And he says he's against that. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this, but it's an interesting concept. He says, well, I think that you actually have destroyed the cultural identity of all of the countries in the Eurozone. Now, Greece, I used to love to travel to Greece because, geez, it was so cheap. Their currency, I mean, geez, you live over there like a king for $100 a week. Now you can't afford it. It's horrible over there now to travel there. It's a great country, and I really liked the Isle of Crete. Spent a week, 10 days there. It was really cool. And I went to Spinalonga, which is an old leper colony. It's on an island, Spinalonga. It was pretty cool. Anyway, I digress. It explains why countries are hedging their bets. It explains why countries are creating other scenarios, right? And so China's infrastructure-led model is making it the top trading partner for more than 100 countries. Now, contrast this with what the West is and has been doing forever. It just, we go in, we steal not steal, we usurp the resources of other countries. And I shouldn't say we, because it wasn't me, but we have, we as America have taken, and by the way, not just us, all the colonial powers before us, but we've, well, there I go again. America has perfected this strategy: regime change operations, covert CIA missions, stuff like that, to get rid of unfriendly actors. That we're going through it right now. I'm not saying you have to disagree with it. I mean, you might think this is great, to take over Venezuela, as it were, or to, let's go get Greenland. More power to you, but I think it's foolish long term. So let's go back to Mr. Lee, okay, what he was talking about, that the 100 million people lifted out of extreme poverty, not projected, not promised, but actually done. They lifted them out. Now, you can argue whatever the definition is, whatever the metrics, the political framing. He showed some graphs on it that said that throughout China, which they have more than, the numbers were from 15 to 20 times the income level of, of the average Chinese person over the last 30 years. Now, the U.S. has gone up too, as far as GDP goes. Now, we're talking about GDP. And China is number one in purchase power parity as far as GDP goes. And Russia's number 4. America's no longer number 1. We're number 1 if you go straight dollars. But you can't afford to live over here either. And what has been stagnant for us over the last 30 years or so has been wage growth. Inflation has gone way up, but wage growth has not kept up, not remotely. But in places like China, it is definitely gone up 15 to 20 times. In America, 4 to 6 times is what he was saying. However the percentage goes out on there. So, and we can argue about definitions all day, but this isn't done by accident. It's not done. When's the last time you heard about China regime changing anyone? Okay, and I'm not here to, to advertise for China. I'm not doing that. I'm not here to argue against America, except to the extent that we engage in economic as well as real warfare, political warfare, regime change. That has been the model. And we've talked about this globalism, and globalism helped lift China up as well, because they're part of the global markets now. But now, with Davos last week, China's been doing it for a little while now. That nobody likes the sanctions talk. More people are talking about this alleged globalized rules-based order that no longer exists. Well, the rules-based order, as Carney said, never existed. Well, they all knew it was twisted toward one side and to the disadvantage of everyone else. And now world leaders are starting to say it openly. Now, Canada, most of the EU, and now England has all been recently in China, hedging their bets. They don't like what America is doing. Okay? Now, I don't necessarily totally disagree. I disagree with the methods. I disagree with the methods of what we're doing, and always have. So I'm pretty consistent in that as far as that goes. Regime change I've never been for. So, but Lee's explanation for the outcome of talking about systems is consistent and really not romanticized at all. China didn't treat development as an abstract, moral project. They didn't call it democracy. They didn't go that way. It treated it as a logistical and an infrastructural project, like belts and roads is going now globally. roads, railways, power grids, urbanization, industrial clusters, digital connectivity, ports weren't treated as secondary to politics. They're treated as the foundation upon which everything else rests. And that is absolutely true. Now, one thing he said is that the problem in the West, according to him, and I had never heard this theory before. Well, you get it. You'll understand it as soon as I say it. I got it as soon as he said it. He said that economically, in a capitalist country, the political class is controlled by the top 100 richest men in America. Now, think about that, because it's probably true when you think about it. Think about how anything happens. It's not done for us. Sure as hell ain't done for us. The people with the money control it all because they control who gets elected and who doesn't by putting the money the advertising behind them. He says, now I don't know I can't verify this, but he seemed pretty freaking certain of it. He goes, that isn't how it is in China. He said in China, there is absolutely no correlation between what the government is doing and what the richest 100 people are doing. That they have capitalism, but in a different style. And most of the means of production and all that stuff, of course, is government controlled. He said, but people are able to get rich in that environment as well. So it was an interesting concept, and I liked it, and I really liked to listen to this guy. And this is where the Chinese saying that Li was referencing was pretty critical. If you want to get rich, build a road. That sentence encapsulates, according to him, an entire Chinese worldview. Roads connect people to markets. Rails connect regions to ports. Power grids allow it to scale up. AI and power. China and India are building some of the biggest nuclear, and Trump actually talked about it. I forget where, but recently he talked about building nuclear power plants here in the U.S., that it's now safe and, they're not totally against it. And he's trying to build these things and use it to control AI, right? Roads connect people to markets and all that stuff. When you don't have any of those things, nothing else matters, does it? But when you do have them, when these things exist, when the infrastructure exists, productivity follows. I'm not here to say that in America we don't have any. I'm saying that we lack focus on some of these things. This is where the 100 million figure matters, the 100 million people lifted out of poverty. It talks about outcomes rather than, intentions. Trump's saying, I'm putting $1 trillion in the economy. You think any of that will ever reach your pocket? Ever? I mean, will you get any of it? Or is it going to be all except, 100,000 of it to a couple of investors, and the rest, you might get a pay raise of $5 an hour in 10 years, something like that. This is potentially why people misunderstand why the Belt and Road Initiative that China is doing all over the world, and why China is the primary or most important trading nation with virtually 2/3 of the globe. 2/3. America, by contrast, we only are the primary trading country or partner with about 60, and that is going down, not up. So I don't know. It isn't because of rhetoric, but because systems are built. We don't have any. I mean, when's the last time you heard of a new port in America? When's the last time you heard about a high-speed rail? I've lectured on that in prior shows. You can go back and check them out. They're well titled. So hold on to this framework, because infrastructure is kind of the theme today. So take this infrastructure that we're talking about. Then I told you yesterday I would bring you back to figure out where we are, where Ukraine is right now. Once again, we had talks, we had discussions about settling the dispute. Ukraine, of course, we're not going to make any territorial concessions, and they're losing their butts, but okay, that doesn't matter. Somebody has to step in for Zelensky. He can't force Russia to its knees. That's not going to happen. And so the dispute or the war will continue. More people will die because Ukraine doesn't want to face reality. And the important thing to note is over the last week, 2 weeks, and last night in particular, on the Russian side of the border, but in the last 2 weeks, the targeting of infrastructure in Ukraine in the coldest month of the year is targeting what? They're targeting electric grids. They're targeting water pumping. They're targeting infrastructure. That's what they're targeting. On the other side, by the way, this means last night there was a huge gas port that they said they're not going to be able to ship gas out of there for a couple of years, or ship any petrol out of there for a couple of years in western Ukraine. And now Kyiv has more than 1,000 homes without power. And the mayor said they will not be able to have power for a long time. Those people need to figure out what they're going to do because it won't be restored. Now, how would you like that? Your mayor says, mayor of Lake Ozark gets up and says, hey, sorry, we've lost power at, 1,000 homes. Sorry, you got to go. Figure out what you're going to do, but power's not going to be restored. That'd be a wake-up call, wouldn't it? So they're having these problems in Kyiv, in Kryvyi Rih, and in, which means curved horn. I don't know. I've always liked the name of that city, Kryvyi Rih. And then Odesa. They've all lost serious infrastructure. They're allowed in Kryvyi Rih. They had videos, quite a few of them, where they had people on the streets daily. They are on the streets and in cars, on the roads, in their cars, blocking up all the roads and having protests. They're only getting 2 hours of electricity, and there's no continuity at all to when you're getting the 2 hours or if you're getting the 2 hours of electricity. And it is cold over there right now. You think it's cold here. These aren't random targets. Kryvyi Rih sits at the heart of Ukraine's industrial and mining sector, right? Odesa is a large port city, a logistics hub, and a gateway through the Black Sea, through Istanbul. And it's they must keep it together, and they cannot. The shipping isn't good. Disrupting these cities disrupts all production, all export, all employment, all revenue. Infrastructure destruction cascades through this economy, or lack thereof, for a long time after the damage is done. And so they also talked about, and by the way, last night they said that in last night's bombardment on Kyiv, 147 missiles and drones were shot toward Kyiv. And of those, Ukraine, according to Ukraine's numbers, they were able to take out 104. So that means one-third of them got through and hit their targets. That's what it means. And I mean, imagine that. 40, 44, 43, whatever it is, last night, missiles and bombs got through to the targets in Kyiv. How long does that take to recover, especially if it's every night? This is. I don't know that people are taking it seriously enough over here. I really don't, and I'm not sure how there isn't more pressure on the old Z monster to do more than he is doing, and more people are saying it now. They're saying the same thing that I said long ago. If we wouldn't fund it, this would have been over extremely quickly if we weren't the ones funding it. So there you have it. So when you talk about this image in Ukraine and the mirror of China's development, we have instead this destruction. The logic is clear. If China's model is build infrastructure to generate prosperity and independence, which now they're saying they're going to do with Canada and England, they're increasing these in the last couple of weeks. They've done it with Europe over the last month or two, and they've done it all over the world. And Trump knows this. Why did he go to Venezuela? Why is he saying that China is going to take over Greenland with Russia? Why is he trying to boot them out and take the $100 billion that they invested in Venezuela and steal all the oil down there? Because he knows that financially we are in trouble. He's a businessman and a deal maker. Okay. And I wanted to make one more point about the infrastructure because it does go both ways. And now Kyiv sent over some 30 or 40 drones and missiles into southwestern, the port side of the Black Sea, Sevastopol and places like that over on the Black Sea, the Russian side over there. And Russia says they took them all out. I don't know that I believe that necessarily, but they are certainly much better suited to take them out than Ukraine is. Ukraine is basically without air defenses these days. So, if China's model is to build infrastructure to generate prosperity and independence, the war model for both sides is destroy infrastructure. What are we doing with sanctions? We're trying to eliminate the ability for Russia, or fund Russia's war. That's what Zelensky's always, Russia's war. Yeah, nothing to do with him. He's nothing. He's just innocent, standing over there. The West didn't do anything to provoke this. This is just started one day in February 2022 and nothing else. The war's model is destroy infrastructure to generate vulnerability and dependence upon other people. Because what's Ukraine? Dependent upon others completely. These aren't metaphors. These are operational strategies, and they work. They work on both ends. China's works because they're building infrastructure worldwide. And another example he gave was in Indonesia. He said that they had huge projects going on in Indonesia, and then they had an election, and the new prime minister, or whatever he's called over there, that was elected, said that that these weren't necessarily positive for Indonesia. This is from Eric Lee's very interesting commentary. He said that the Chinese immediately went into it. They didn't go in and try to, sanction them out or say, here's the contract. They went and renegotiated. They renegotiated and got the deal going to continue the path forward. That sounds reasonable to me. You don't go sanction the hell out of them or say, look, what we're doing what Trump said yesterday. One of the quotes from Trump, and I haven't gotten it right in front of me, but to paraphrase, he's like beating up on Carney for going over to China, and he's doing the same. Going, well, China's going to take over Canada now. Basically, now you're going to be subject to China. Good move, basically. And I don't believe that at all. People are creating alternatives. That's what's happening. Economically, that's what people do. Just because you can't afford a Lamborghini, or a Porsche, that's probably too extreme. Let's say you can't afford a sports car convertible, doesn't mean that you don't try to go out and find a convertible you can afford. You make alternatives. You create alternatives, things that you can live with. People can't live with what America is doing right now. And I don't think that the end result necessarily will give you what you think it's going to give you. And, all right, it's a financial transaction. But people don't make all decisions based on transactional profit. They make it on political profit, too. Systemic profit, infrastructural profit as well, right? And let's talk about the invisible system, which is the financial structure right now, because the physical structure doesn't exist all on its own. It's financed, it's insured, it's sustained through a second layer of infrastructure that is very, at least as decisive, if not even more so, the financial infrastructure. Bond markets, interest rates, currency, settlement systems, trade finance. These are all pipelines through which capital flows, okay? They demonstrate whether long-term projects are even viable, whether states can borrow affordably, and whether rebuilding after destruction is even possible at all. And last night, or this morning, there are a number of commentaries going on about the Japanese bond market specifically and how it is being taxed because they are starting to look inward into into Japan and change their processes because they're trying to save their own market. Well, what does that do when the largest loan shark to America is changing its interest rate policies inside their own country? That means it's no longer profitable to borrow money in Japan and use it to finance trade and investment in America because your rates are no longer profitable for that. And so you bring it back to Japan because the rates are higher. And the dollar is weaker this morning, quite a bit. And so this is why developments in places like Japan's bond market matter far beyond Japan. And for decades, Japan has functioned as the stabilizer of long-term money because they held it long-term. Ultra-low yields and predictable behavior made the Japanese government bond a cornerstone of global finance. But infrastructure financing depends upon that sort of predictability. But when long-term rates are volatile, when bond markets reprice risk all of a sudden, infrastructure is harder to fund. Projects are delayed, costs rise, governments face sharp trade-offs between debt service and investment. And Japan is having the same trouble that we have, financing their debt, funding it, debt service. In America, I forget which senator it was, but I was listening to one of them last week. He said that very soon our interest payments each year will be more than our GDP. That's a shocker. We're approaching $40 trillion. $40 trillion. And the interest is about half of that. It's nonsense. So layer on top of this the role of the dollar, on top of all of these things. The dollar isn't just a currency. It's a core, has been the core of global settlements. But that is changing too. It's been the road on which international trade has traveled. That's why Donald Trump says things like, if you start creating an alternative system where we'll sanction the hell out of you. That's it. That's what we're going to do is when access to the financial roads are conditioned, restricted, or weaponized through sanctions and financial coercion, it ceases to function as a neutral infrastructure and becomes a control mechanism for like we're doing. We just seize countries, and when infrastructure is a control mechanism, all of these international actors begin to build alternative structures. It's not an ideological rebellion. It's risk management, which everybody engages in, right? I wanted to add to this what Musk was talking about. If you go out, his segment, and I listened to only 20 minutes of the 30. I didn't finish. It was starting to get a little repetitive to me. But him being present at Davos mattered. Not only because he's a celebrity, but also because of the contrast. Musk operates in a financial, physical world, electricity generation, battery storage, capacity of grids, satellite networks, launch systems. I read an article yesterday that he's allowing Russia to start using Starlink again. And I told you that Russia is creating their own 300 satellite system to launch as well. I forget what it's called, but I told you about that a couple of days ago. But Elon Musk was there talking about infrastructure as well. Much of the conversation was around transition of values, coordination, and he talked about fundamentally capacity, electrification and generation, and AI power grid density, digital economies with stable grids and stable data infrastructure. These aren't optional. They're required prerequisites. You don't finance them, you're not going to get the business. Build a road, you'll make a lot of people rich, right? That's your economic function, is building the pathways. So when you talk about digitization, how are you going to digitize in a blackout in Ukraine, in Kyiv, Kryvyi Rih, in Odesa? How are they going to connect to to the internet without power? Well, what difference does the internet make? And your phone, you can use it for a day, but how are you going to charge it? You can't run your car without fuel. So you can't innovate around a dead grid. And so you can't transition without energy. Without infrastructure, what are you going to negotiate? How are you going to do it? So I wanted to bring this back now to, it's less than 10 minutes, about Jeffrey Sachs. And I told you I was going to play this. And he's not an outsider. He's somebody who helped design in depth the post-Cold War economic architecture. When he talks about sanctions, tariffs, financial coercion as economic warfare, he's diagnosing a system that has turned its own infrastructure and its own infrastructure woes into a weapon. We talked yesterday a little bit about Severny Potok, Nord Stream pipelines, and how that was destroyed, right? His warning isn't a moral warning, it's a structural warning from Jeffrey Sachs. It was a pretty cool, he's what he talked about, and I'm going to share that whole thing with you. Unpredictability, raising risk premiums, higher risk premiums increase the cost of capital, higher capital reduces investment in long-term infrastructure, and the entire system starts to eat itself. So when he says countries are moving away from dollar dependence, he's describing an infrastructure problem. If the main road is dangerous, traffic will go on other streets, New payment systems, currency swaps, trade arrangements, they're not rebellion. They're creating alternatives. That's what they are. So I'm going to play that for you here. I have it teed up here somewhere. Reasonably simple to find. But I had to play that other one first. There were a couple of other interesting ones. There was another Russian discussion. And by the way, the Eric Lee one was pretty good. There's another girl called World Affairs in Context, that channel. She gave something good on the Japanese bond markets and all of that as well. And let's see here. There was an interesting Carney discussion, which I might throw in a little bit, but I doubt it. Let us. No. Now it's not going to be in my history. Here he is, Jeffrey Sachs.
Now, President Trump is threatening stiff new tariffs on.
Let's see here. Here we go. If I can figure out how to play this. Oh, I already had the. I never turned it off from last time. Sorry about that, friends and neighbors. Here we go.
On Canada if it enters a trade deal with China. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said his recent talks with Beijing comply with a deal signed by the U.S. and Mexico. Listen.
Canada respects our engagements, our commitments. We have commitments under CUSMA that not to pursue free trade agreements with non-market economies without prior notification. We have no intention of doing that with China or any other non-market economy.
Now, Trump's latest threats follow Carney's warning last week in Davos that we're experiencing a global rupture. He said the rules-based order has given way to geoeconomics, the combination of economic and geographic factors relating to international trade and specifically how countries wield that economic power to achieve their political, not just their economic goals. Economist Jeffrey Sachs is the president of UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and he joins us now. Good to have you here, as we heard so much in the last few days about global economics and geoeconomics in particular. You point out that in the last few days, the Trump administration has started to call this, in your words, economic statecraft. You say it's economic warfare. How so?
Okay, before she gets to that, I wanted to point out that what she was saying about Carney and his commentary in Davos wasn't exactly accurate. He talked about the old economic order and the rules-based and how we weren't even following it anymore. He was more harsh than she put on here. I'd go a little bit harsher than she said. But listen to how Jeffrey Sachs responds here.
Well, that's actually the phrase economic statecraft that Secretary Bessent used. He said that the U.S. is waging an economic war, in essence, against Iran. He talked about the fact that during the past year, the U.S. went out to crush the Iranian economy. It went out to drive the currency to collapse and to bring people out onto the streets. And that happened. There's tremendous unrest. And Secretary Bessent said, well, things are moving in a good direction. This is really extraordinary. I thought MAGA meant looking after the United States, not going out to destroy other governments and other countries. But right now we have a kind of lawlessness in the U.S. Approach. It's very personalistic. The president just does what he wants to do. There's no congressional role. There's no claim to law. And other countries are reacting, and the markets are reacting, because this unpredictability is actually extremely dangerous for the U.S. as well as for the world economy. Why did Trump back down on the threat about Greenland last week? Well, the main factor was the stock market plummeted the day before he got to Davos. And he listened. He can't control the stock market. So he was making chaos in the international markets.
So you call it lawless, to use your words. Prime Minister Mark Carney called it a rupture in the world order at the instigation of the United States, even though he didn't name it that way. You know, ECB President Christine Lagarde said she disagreed, that she thought that was going too far. Does she have a point?
No. If you are trying to create mass unrest, bring people out on the streets, and create chaos, and then say that's going in a good direction. No, you're not going too far to call that economic warfare and to say that that's lawless. It's lawless in two senses. It's lawless in the domestic law of the United States. We have a constitution. The power to put on tariffs is in Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution. It's not a whim of the president, but he's treating it as a whim. That issue is before the U.S. Supreme Court right now. It's definitely lawless in terms of international law, which is the UN Charter. Unfortunately, this administration sneers at the UN Charter. They forget that the United States ratified the UN Charter. It's a treaty of the United States. It is the law of the land under our Constitution, a ratified treaty. So it's not to be sneered at. And it is definitely illegal under international law for a country to use force to bring down another government. Right. And this economic strangulation is precisely that.
And you mentioned there the Supreme Court. We will see whether or not Congress will ever step in at this point. I do want to get to the issue, though, of those sanctions. And you've written extensively. You've studied this extensively in the past few decades, not just the last few months. The power of sanctions. Now, the primacy of the U.S. currency to wage that economic warfare, that is key. But on their face, sanctions against Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and I've just named three, they've hurt those countries, right? But principally, they've hurt the citizens in those countries. They've not really affected change. What explains that? Regime change, I should say.
Yes, that's a very good point. I would say the sanctions on Russia have mainly hurt the European Union. They cut themselves off from low-cost energy. Maybe Trump and his friends like that because now Europe buys liquefied natural gas from the United States at 6 times the price that it was paying for Russian gas. But the sanctions just meant that Russia rerouted its oil and gas towards Asia. So it did not bring down the Russian economy, but it did bring down German industry. The threats that Trump made threaten the U.S. economy. They scared the wits out of the international markets. It's strange. The United States borrows from the rest of the world heavily. We're running huge budget deficits, and our interest rates are rising, in part because the U.S. is not a good bet. And then what is also happening that's very important for people to understand is other countries are shifting away from using dollars. The privilege that the U.S. has, that our industry and economy has by the use of the dollar globally is going away. Now, Trump thunders about that. Anybody that threatens the U.S. dollar, they're going to hear from us. But he can't stop that because there is no way to compel third countries to use the dollar when it has been weaponized in this way.
Yeah, and people are really waiting to see if that comes to fruition on those markets, especially when we talk about things like long bonds and what those long-term interest rates are going to do. Jeffrey Sachs, we do have to leave it there. We will have you back. Appreciate it.
And that is the end. Now, granted, in some respects, people do talk to whoever their audience is, and especially when they're questioning someone. And CNN, I don't usually watch. I don't like any of their commentators. I think they're extremely twisted and extremely negative Trump, negative, I don't know, normal folks is what it seems like to me. I don't like CNN in general, but I'm not a fan of any of the large media outlets. But sometimes that's where you get Jeffrey Sachs will be interviewed by a lot of different people, and he's been on a lot of different channels. I like to listen to him. And this is a knowledgeable guy. Whether you fully back what he's saying or not, he is definitely an expert on international financial and economic policies and what they have done. And one of the notable things is one of the ones that I've always talked about is that people are creating alternatives to the dollar. And unfortunately, that the speed at which they are doing that is increasing dramatically, and the speed at which people are not purchasing U.S. debt any longer is going up. Everyone is hedging. Every other country. England going to China. Some of the things that I have discussed here with you today, they are very important to at least attempt to understand where they are. So let's talk about this, about the infrastructure and legitimacy. Like Sachs was putting out there, that people are not abandoning, but creating alternatives to the U.S. hegemony or the Western hegemony, the globalist theory, the liberal Democrat, liberal democracy, not Democrat, but the liberal democracies that have dominated the financial systems for the last 80 years. Not happening. Let's see. At the end of the line, though, it's about whether lights will stay on, whether heat works in the winter, whether transport routes and data routes and communication routes function, whether currency can hold its value, whether the future feels like something you can build upon, or whether you need to hedge your bets. And a lot more people are hedging these days than feeling, and I mean worldwide, and they're hedging against the United States or creating alternatives to have alternatives to the United States, because our country is perceived as not as stable as it should be. Now, a lot of that is internal to us, because it's always been that way. We change direction every 4 years anyway, or every 8, and things just turn. It's dependent upon one guy. That's part of the beauty of our system. It's also part of the shortcomings of our system. It's you don't create something. Somebody comes in, and this happens in other societies as well, mostly in democracies where a new person comes in. You don't have the stability that you would otherwise have with, a Vladimir Putin. And you can say a lot of things like the fact that it's been stable for the most part in Russia, and you can have a predictable result, means that people can feel comfortable making a decision that isn't going to be changed based on somebody else's activity or some other person coming into an election. Or bond rates in Japan, the rate of interest going up, which means that Japanese people are going to bring their money home when they haven't done so for 80 years, because it's cheaper to borrow money there and invested in other places because of the low rates of borrowing, which are changing, and had a big hit yesterday. So if you don't follow that stuff, it's an interesting topic to discuss. This is why the global order recently feels very unstable. Not because people are disagreeing about values or disagreeing about democracy versus socialism or whatever, but because multiple layers of infrastructure, physical infrastructure, financial, and technological infrastructure are all under simultaneous stress everywhere. So the future isn't going to be decided by, Davos conferences. It's not going to be decided upon rhetoric of, geez, I'm taking Greenland and I already took Venezuela, and they're going to get in line, and their people better fall in line behind us and behind whoever we appoint, because it's my country now. It's not going to be decided by that. It's going to be decided by who can build, protect, finance, and fund and maintain infrastructure reliably in a world where these sorts of things are increasingly targeted. And I tell you what, I believe it's time for folks to buckle in. It's going to be a bumpy ride, is what I think, over the next at least 3 years, more if people don't pull their heads out of their rear ends. And I always say that America doesn't play well with others. And it would be better, in my opinion, if we did, or attempted to, at least. And I don't think we do that very well. And I, not necessarily from a militaristic or a military or a war point of view or anything like that, although I'm definitely anti-regime change anywhere. I don't think that's our function. And it's not our job to change the leader of Iraq. Never has been. You know, it's not our job to change the leader in Venezuela, whether you agree or disagree. It's not your job to take over that country. I disagree fundamentally with that concept, and always have, by the way. So it's not, you know, when I was in the military, had they sent me to Iraq, which I was in the Army for both Desert Storms, you know, 1 and 2, I was in the military. And, you know, what good's a Russian interpreter going to do over there? They didn't send me there. I was a diplomatic interpreter and never went. And but had they sent me, I would have done what, you know, I agreed to do when I signed the contract. But that doesn't mean I would have necessarily liked it. You know, that because I disagree fundamentally with regime change operations. And by the way, I didn't believe there were any weapons of mass destruction anywhere. I never did believe that. That sounds like a really good story, but I don't believe that. All righty. Well, I want to go to a few of the events of today that have come up as well. We've had an announcement about the next set of trilateral meetings later this week. Dmitry Peskov announced today, he's a Kremlin spokesman, that the next meeting between Russia, U.S., and Ukraine will take place later this week on February 1st. Is when it's going to take place. And speaking to reporters, Peskov said that the meeting will take place on Sunday, but noted that it's a rough estimate of the time frame, but that we're working with that for now. Previously, the date was subject to speculation by a bunch of different outlets. The first rounds, the three-way rounds, Moscow, Washington, and Kyiv, took place last week in Abu Dhabi. And this was the first time that all three sides sat down at the same table, and the talks lasted for 2 days. In part, some people say they were productive, but not many specifics were made public. And negotiators noted that there's a lot more work to be done. And Zelensky immediately afterwards said there isn't going to be any territorial concessions by Ukraine again. And so, as I said earlier in the program, I think it's nuts to think that it will be. By the start of 2026, the Ukraine conflict, it's the same, it's still proceeding. There's been a year, 2025 was a year of pretty intense warfare, grinding battles for key logistics hubs and cities, and the steady loss of Ukrainian reserves and people, regular soldiers, equipment, destruction of hardware, and certainly of the front line. It's once again, it's collapsing. But there is an operational kind of I don't want to call it a pause, but I don't want to call it any sort of de-escalation. Periods of calm have consistently served as an interval for regrouping, and I say they're also a time period when heavy missile and drone strikes and stuff like that are being conducted. They're trying to, and they're preparing for the next big moves. So a similar pattern came up last year around the same time. The fighting was lessened during winter months. It's very, very cold. And in spring, there was a large-scale Russian offensive that defined most of 2025. And that was concluded by the year's end, that what they did. It's going to happen again. And so there's little reason to assume that the Russian general staff has abandoned this approach. On the contrary, the current pause is less of an endpoint. This is not the end, even though they are having negotiations, the three ways that I talked about. Against this, the key question is not whether the front's going to heat up again, but where and how. The configuration of forces, the condition of Ukrainian defenses or lack thereof, and the logic of Russian operational planning all point to several new axes of advance, each with their own strategic value. So let's look first up at Sumy. Now, Sumy is south of Belgorod, and it's the northern province in Ukraine, okay? And what Putin said a year ago was they want to create a buffer zone that will make it much tougher for anybody to hit Moscow from either of those regions, right? So there is a bit of a buffer zone now, which it never would have happened without the Kursk offensive when the Ukrainians went into Kursk and messed around in there, wanted to go up to the Kursk nuclear power plant and take that over. There's a new front that has opened up in there. There's a large village called Grabovskaya. Hasn't been much huge fighting up there, just a steady advance of the Russians coming down there to create this buffer zone. So Sumy is probably going to continue to see some action to create this buffer zone. And next to that, there's a region called Kharkov, and that will also have a lot of, they're pushing hard from the east, the Russians are, and I believe they want to get all the way into Kharkov, which is south of Belgorod. They're tired of Belgorod being pounded from the south, and so there's plenty of ways to go. And I told you about Seversk, Chasiv Yar, Konstantinovka, and they're going towards Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and this is one of the active areas in January. So from Seversk, the south group of forces is pushing west along Seversky Donets River to Slavyansk, and the key settlements, like Zakotnaya, have been captured, and the major next objective is Raya Alexandrovka. And so fighting is also continuing in Konstantinovka, and there's semi-encirclement again, classic. Russians create these things they like to call cauldrons, and these are still ongoing. It means it's slow, but Kramatorsk and Slavyansk and Druzhkova and the big cities to the left of Konstantinovka, and these are places in eastern on the eastern front side that are the cauldron, or this big pocket is being created, and then Russia closes the pocket, and then you end up like what you had in a couple in the Pokrovsk and Mirnograd regions. And so now Pokrovsk and Mirnograd are completely under Russian control, and you don't hear anything about it anymore. And those are fairly large cities, and I always said, this is going to go all the way to the Dnieper River. That's what I believe. And Gulya Polya and Dnieper River are the last strongholds on the way to the city of Zaporizhia, right? According to the Russian constitution, the whole region of Zaporizhia and its capital, which is a city by the same name, are occupied by Ukrainian forces. And the advance of the eastern group of forces in Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia and the effective collapse of the Ukraine front near that area and the capture of the city at the end of last year have all created a solid foundation for them to continue to advance and take over the rest of Zaporizhia. So at the same time, the Dnieper River is now active. All of the front lines along the Dnieper. And so the main Ukrainian stronghold on the way to Zaporizhia is the city of Orekhov, which is the center of Ukrainian counteroffensive in 2023. And so approaching Orekhov from the south is pretty challenging because there's, plenty of forces up in there in Orekhov, but they've already gone past the other parts in Zaporizhia, and they're doing the same sort of thing down there, creating these cauldrons. The only reason I bring all this up is because it appears to me that the cauldrons are forming in those two key pocket areas, and these are big cauldrons or encirclements. And Russia, it's been classic. I've watched this 5-10 times as they get into cities. They basically surround the city, force the Ukrainians to do something, and most of the time the Ukrainians don't. They don't leave, and they end up instead surrounded because Russia cuts off all supply to them, and then we argue about whether or not Russia really has control or doesn't have control, and a couple of months later, you just go, oh yeah, Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, those were taken by the Russians, but you don't want... The whole time it's occurring, nobody wants to admit that this is what's happening, but right now, they're clearly under Russian control. And there was, when I started talking about it back in, October, it was, Russia claims that they got some 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers surrounded in there, and they offered to let Western journalists come in and see what was going on and prove it. You want to come see it? Come on in. And they wouldn't let them. And then they had those fake videos that were posted on the Ukrainian side that were clearly AI'd, where Zelensky was going to go stand in front of a central town part. But it was clear that it was done, that it was an old picture of it and it wasn't done properly. So I don't know. There's this war is not going well. And I wanted to bring that up, and let's see. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about, where is that story? Hungary. Hungary has launched a national petition. Hungary, to tell EU officials that they are not willing to foot the bill for funding Ukraine and are tired of the higher domestic costs caused by Kyiv's conflicts with Moscow. So in a statement Monday, the Hungarian government said that the petition is intended to send a message to Brussels that Hungary will not pay for Ukraine's military expenses or prop up Kyiv for the next decade while suffering higher utility bills at home. Because they used to get low-cost gas and oil through the pipeline that ran through Ukraine, which they had funded with Russia. Now it costs more because they have to go down through Turk Stream, through Turkey, or through the Greek route is, I forget, that they have to come up through that way. And so this ballot, which is a kind of a referendum, offers a chance to vote on 3 items. So a parliamentary state secretary for Prime Minister Viktor Orban accused the EU of pouring money into Ukraine without consulting any of the citizens of the bloc. He claimed that Brussels has already spent 170 billion euro, or $204 billion, supporting Kyiv. And now Brussels wants more. They want 800 billion for Ukraine's state financing and another 700 billion to fund the conflict. And officials are warning that this funding is going to require further austerity for, taxing your own citizens to fund citizens of another country, and is going to end up forcing the citizens to pay higher household utility prices. And he said would be enforced because Hungary is just a puppet Brussels compliant government comes to power if Orban doesn't stay in power. So Orban's government has repeatedly clashed with the EU over support for Kyiv since the escalation of Ukraine conflict in 2022, and they criticize sanctions on Russia as detrimental to the entire bloc, and they refuse to send weapons to Kyiv. Budapest opposes Kyiv's ambitions to join the EU and NATO, and they say that this would drag the bloc into a direct conflict with Moscow, which nobody sees as positive. I saw something yesterday or late last night that said that there was discussions about Russia threatening Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, those four up in there. That said, and there was some commentary. I went and listened to it, but most of it was, these people are nuts. They're so Russophobic, and everything they say is they're trying to get the rest of Europe all whipped up to go after Russia, and that a lot of these people end up in power in the EU, organization. Like Ursula von der Leyen's puppets, or henchmen. So it's a strange old world we're living in. Let's see. There were a couple of opinion pieces that I wanted to talk about, and one of them was pretty funny. How, and I liked. Maybe I will. I think I have enough time to share this. Because I read it actually, and I think I'm going to share it with you. This is written by, he's a literary critic, a guy named Dmitry Samoilov. And here's the article. The article is called, and it came out on the 24th of January, several days ago. And he goes, here's the thing. The article is called "Sex is Gone. Why?" And he said, here's the thing. The world many of us grew up in has vanished, not because of geopolitics, but because of sex. No, this is not a personal confession. It's an observation about culture. Sex, once treated as central to modern life, is quietly retreating. And the shift is so broad that it tells us something uncomfortable about where society has gone. And the guy writing the story, Dmitry, he says, I came of age in the 90s when sex was everywhere, not just in private life, but in public space. Advertising ran on the formula that sex sells. Some products logically lent themselves to erotic imagery and others did not. Yet a sexualized female body could be used to sell almost anything. Including a glass of water. Newspapers, car magazines, even publications about the paranormal carried nude or semi-nude photo shoots. Television, long before late night, included bedroom scenes as routine. Youth series revolved around the first sexual experiences. Schools distributed brochures about contraception. Words once whispered were now spoken on the air. Orgasm, masturbation, intercourse. That reminds me of a Monty Python skit, which I won't share with you because I want to finish this article. The message was clear. Sex was not only normal, it was valuable, exciting, a permanent feature of modern life. 30 years later, we are told almost casually that sex is overrated. This is not, excuse me, this is not anecdotal. Surveys do reflect a real shift. Research by the NAFI Analytical Center show that 22% of people aged 18 to 25 are not sexually active. More than half of respondents report problems in their intimate lives. 40% cannot discuss sexual issues with their partner. Large numbers report dissatisfaction, lack of desire, or pain. Among women, the figures are especially stark. More revealing still are value rankings. Among people in long-term relationships, sex comes last on the list for what is necessary for well-being. For many young people, it does not appear as a value at all. Health, money, status, travel, and peace of mind. These now dominate. Sex has slipped off of the agenda. Given how problematized the intimate sphere has become, this is hardly surprising. Sex today competes with the entire digital universe. Short video, streaming platforms, games, endless online content. Why invest emotional and physical effort when easier form of stimulations are available on demand? Add to this anxiety. Choosing a partner now feels like navigating a field of red flags. Fear of manipulation, abuse, psychological labels, then practical concerns. What if it leads to commitment, marriage, a mortgage? In such a climate, withdrawal looks rational. How did we get here? That's a good question. How did we get here? The period we remember as sexually liberated may have been a historical exception. Roughly from the 50s onward, a unique combination of factors aligned. Contraception was widespread, living standards rose, housing conditions improved, education expanded, sexual behavior began to separate from reproduction and marriage. This was the so-called second demographic transition. Sex could exist for pleasure, independent of family formation. For a few decades, sex was both accessible and culturally celebrated. We assumed this was a permanent achievement. But across most of human history, sex was not a sphere of self-expression. For the majority, it was tied to necessity, reproduction, and obligation. Hygiene, privacy, comfort, the conditions that make mutual pleasure possible, were luxuries. Ideas like female orgasm or emotional compatibility were not central concerns for ordinary people. We like to point to ancient erotic arts and texts such as the Kama Sutra, yet these represent elite or symbolic cultures, not the daily experience of most people. What the late 20th century did was briefly place sex at the center of mass culture. That moment appears to be passing. Now sex competes not only with digital entertainment, but with broader ethos of individual optimization. Time is a resource. Energy is limited. People prioritize career, fitness, mental stability, travel, consumption. Sex, with its uncertainties and vulnerabilities, looks inefficient. The result is paradoxical. A society saturated with sexual imagery in the recent past is producing generations less interested in sexual practice. The language of desire remains in advertising and media, but lived reality is shifting toward disengagement. Perhaps this is not decline, but rebalancing. Sex, having enjoyed a period of cultural overexposure, returns to being one element among many, no longer the organizing principle of youth culture. Yet the contrast with the 90s is striking enough to feel like a rupture. That earlier era left a vast archive of film, novels, memories depicting a world in which sex was easy, central, almost guaranteed. We end up studying that period in a way we study other brief cultural phases, through art and nostalgia rather than personal experience. It turns out that the age when sex was treated as a universal value may have been an interlude, not a destination. And we are now living through the correction. This article was first published by the online newspaper Gazeta.ru, Russia, and was translated and edited here. So I think that was pretty cool. At any rate, I wanted to share that with you, and I actually managed to get it in before the end of the show. This is International Flavor. I'm very glad you were with me here today. You can join me every day from 7:30. Oh, today is the longest day on radio, isn't it? It's Wednesday, isn't it? All day today. And we have plenty of shows here. Coming up next is the Damn Schwag. And JR will be later. I don't even have the schedule in front of me. But you can see our schedule by going to damradio.com/schedule. And you can listen to all the old podcasts by going to damradio.com/podcasts or go out to internationalflavor.com. I hope you have a wonderful day. See you tomorrow.